Hello and most welcome to 1725 of the Heidegger series. And we will continue the recording from 1722, Wittgenstein on aspect blindness and meaning blindness, by authors Ohad, Nachtomy and Andreas. We left off at page 59. The third paragraph, beginning a new chapter. I think you can make the text a little bit bigger. Perfect. The scope of aspect blindness. In close vicinity to his remarks on meaning blindness, there are extensive discussions of aspect blindness related to sophisticated aesthetic capacities. Such as being able to appreciate certain features of romantic piano music. These remarks suggest that meaning blindness, whether a genuine psychological possibility or a thought experiment, would be restricted to similarly sophisticated capacities. But if so, why does Wittgenstein choose a term, meaning blindness, that seems to relate to a broader scope of phenomena? In discussing meaning blindness, Wittgenstein raises the following question. How can the absence of an experience in hearing a word be an obstacle to or influence calculating with words? In some remarks, he considers the possibility that such an experience plays no role in our ability to play language games. Consider a proposition containing the ambiguous word bank. An example to which Wittgenstein returns again and again. Intuitively, one might think that one experiences something different when bank means something like a bench than when bank refers to a fiscal institution or when it is part of the phrase riverbank. But Wittgenstein asks, don't all experiences of understanding here get passed over by the usage the practice of the language games? If so, Wittgenstein cautions it would be entirely misleading to speak of gestalt blindness or meaning blindness, because we call someone blind who lacks a sensation. If what one experiences in hearing a word plays no role in a language game, no experience relevant for understanding meaning can be missing. Yet it is not so clear whether Wittgenstein regarded the issue as settled. His long series of remarks on meaning blindness suggests that he considers the possibility that some form of experience may figure among semantic concepts. The importance of the concept of meaning blindness lies in the kinship between seeing an aspect and experiencing a meaning of a word. For we want to ask, what is someone lacking who cannot experience the word? The exact role he assigns to experience in understanding meaning and the scope of meaning blindness remain, however, rather vague. In fact, that is this precisely what the notion of aspect blindness is supposed to do. That is, examine whether experiencing the meaning of a word plays any significant role in our linguistic practices. In response to this challenge, Joachim Schulte has proposed to restrict Wittgenstein's notion to a very narrow range of cases. According to Schulte, meaning blindness applies to sophisticated aesthetic sensitivities alone. According to his interpretation, the remark that aspect blindness is akin to the lack of having a musical ear is most significant for Wittgenstein's view. Schulte's interpretation is well rounded in a number of texts. It is supported, for example, by this passage. Could one say that meaning blindness would express itself in that one could not say successfully to such a person, "You must hear the word as, then you will pronounce the sentence correctly"? This is a directive that one gives when playing a piece of music. Play this as if it were the answer. Similarly, Wittgenstein mentions the directive as if from far away, from Schumann's Davidsbündlertänze, as an example of the kind of directive that a meaning blind person would not be able to understand. Schulte reads Wittgenstein's remarks about the lack of certain aesthetic capacities as implying that his discussion on meaning blindness is primarily intended to bring out the absence of such highly specialized abilities. Eddie Zemak, on the other hand, suggests that the scope of meaning blindness goes beyond the absence of aesthetic capacities and pertains to the inability to experience certain qualia associated with hearing words. A bit further down, hearing words. Yeah, there we are. His interpretation is supported by passages such as this one. It is as if the word that I understand had a particular slight aroma which corresponds to the understanding. As if two words that are well known to me differed not only with respect to their sound, or look, but also, even if I do not imagine anything particular in connection with them. With respect to atmosphere, but recall how the names of famous poets and composers seem to have sucked in a peculiar meaning, such that one can say the names Beethoven and Mozart do not only sound differently, but they are accompanied by a different character. Wittgenstein describes a similar phenomenon when he points out that different human beings have more or less strong feelings towards the change of orthography of a word. Their feeling is not only piety for the old usage, someone for whom orthography is only a practical matter is lacking a feeling similar to the feeling the meaning blind would lack. Think in this connection of how you would react to a misspelling of your name. Most of us would not be indifferent, even if this does not result in any misunderstanding concerning the reference or even the pronunciations of the name. According to Wittgenstein's remark here, one who's indifferent to such a change in orthography would be akin to a meaning blind. In a similar vein, Wittgenstein says that a person unable to experience the ambiguity of the words involved in a pun would be meaning blind. This suggests that what a meaning blind would lack is not peculiar and marginal, but rather something quite central. One can think here of the difference between the way humans identify letters and characters and the way sophisticated reading programs can identify them. While Semach's and Schulte's interpretations surely capture an important aspect of what Wittgenstein had in mind, Bar-Eli suggests that Wittgenstein's notion of meaning blindness goes beyond the inability to understand certain nuances in work of art and beyond the inability to experience certain qualia or sensations associated with words. According to his reading, meaning blindness has to do with the conceptual connection that Wittgenstein establishes between aspect perception and experiencing meaning. For example, consider Wittgenstein's remarks about the English words this, that, these, those, will, and shall. It would be difficult to give rules for the use of these words. Their use is felt, as it were, as a physiognomy. This suggests that these words we would not consider as clear example of ambiguous words, too are experienced in a particular way that relates to our very capacity or incapacity to master their usage. Borelli has emphasized that the experience Wittgenstein has in mind here is an objective feature of the usage of words. Some experiences not only accompany the usage of words, but also play a constitutive role for the usage of words. A manuscript from 1947 supports this reading where Wittgenstein suggests that experiencing meaning and seeing aspects are similar. The case of the experienced meaning is akin with seeing a figure as this or that. We must describe this conceptual kinship. We do not say that in both cases we have to do with the same. Wittgenstein holds here that experiencing meaning and seeing aspects are not identical. Perhaps what he is suggesting is that experiencing meaning and seeing aspects are related, such that the ability of seeing aspects is a necessary condition for using science, and more generally for learning a language as a system of science. Anyone who cannot understand and learn to use the words to see the sign as an arrow, that's whom I call meaning blind. It will make no sense to tell him, you must try to see it as an arrow. This passage, this that whom I call meaning blind, and one won't be able to help him in that way. This is a passage that we would like to stress for our own reading. A meaning blind cannot learn to use the words to see the sign as an arrow. This passage suggests that meaning blindness would not be restricted to refining aesthetic capacities or to the capacity of experiencing qualia. Rather, meaning blindness would limit our ways of using science in a far more fundamental way. If a meaning blind person is unable to see a sign as an arrow, she would also be unable to use the sign in the way we usually do. That is, look at the sign of an arrow and see in which direction it points, or to use it to direct someone which way to go. This example illustrates the significance of the inability of seeing a certain drawing as a sign, as an arrow in this case, and how the inability to see aspects would prevent making drawings or signs become meaningful. If this is right, then it looks like the scope of meaning blindness is broader than that of refined aesthetic judgment. My comment here as suggested by Joachim Schulte. In the next sections, we attempt to show that contextualizing Wittgenstein's remarks from the late 1940s with the help of material from his notebooks from the early 1930s and early 1940s helps clarifying the relation between aspect perception and meaning. Looking into this material suggests that according to Wittgenstein's views in the 1930s and mid-1940s, aspect seeing plays an important role in Wittgenstein's views of forming concepts and in following rules. Two features that are clearly central to Wittgenstein's view of understanding and meaning. First, we turn to show the role of aspect perception in Wittgenstein's discussion of concept formation. Two, the acute and the chronic phases of aspect seeing. Wittgenstein writes, I must distinguish between continuous seeing of an aspect and the dawning of an aspect. In his remarks on the philosophy of psychology, he puts this point as follows. Seeing, hearing, this as a variant of that. Here there is a moment at which I think of B at the sight of A. Where the seeing is, so to speak, acute, and then again the time in which it is chronic. When we are struck by a new aspect, or when we notice an aspect change, our seeing of an aspect is clearly in an acute phase. When a new aspect is dawning, we make a new comparison with an object or a concept that we did not notice earlier. For instance, that a rabbit drawing could also be seen as a duck. Aspect seeing becomes continuous when we are seeing the same aspect time and again, so that the seeing it becomes a matter of course, chronic, so to speak. At this phase, we are not usually aware that we are seeing an aspect. We are not normally seeing a picture of a person as a picture person, and this is important, but as a person. One person. Wittgenstein's distinction between the acute and the chronic phases of aspect seeing a distinction that sheds some light on the scope of aspect seeing as well, is often overlooked. Here we point out the role it plays in concept formation and language acquisition. Wittgenstein's discussion in Philosophical Investigations, Part 2, 11, begins by distinguishing two uses of the word see. The one, what do you see there? I see this. And then a description, a drawing, a copy. The other, I see the likeness between these two faces. I contemplate a face and then suddenly notice its likeness to another. I see that it has not changed, and yet I see it differently. I call this experience noticing an aspect. When I contemplate a face and then suddenly notice its likeness to another, I make a comparison and a similarity judgment. Making comparisons and noticing similarities are closely related to the distinction between the chronic and the acute phase of aspect perception. As Wittgenstein says, in the temporal sense, the aspect is only the kind of way in which we again and again see the picture. We often see a character or a sign in a chronic phase that is under certain aspect in accordance with certain usage related to other characters or objects. But ordinarily we are also unaware of this assimilated relation between a character or a sign and the aspect under which we see it. Thus it seems that Wittgenstein's examples of aspect dawning, that is, when a duck rabbit drawing strikes us as a rabbit rather than a duck. Are we meant to draw our attention by way of contrast to the way we ordinarily see drawings or signs under an aspect continuously? Wittgenstein is drawing our attention to an aspect dawning in the acute phase by using examples of aspect change. In this way, he seeks to make us realize the extent to which in ordinary and routine seeing, such as in reading, much of what we simply call seeing may involve aspect seeing. Aspect seeing of which we are unaware. Wittgenstein states this explicitly. We become conscious of the aspect only when it changes. He is also pointing out that other aspects we have not noticed may be related to the drawing or the musical theme as well, so that the same drawing can be seen in various, though conceptually articulated ways. Let us draw attention to another feature of aspect seeing related to acute aspect seeing, namely that it is voluntary. Wittgenstein writes, seeing an aspect is, and I think this is very important, a voluntary act. We can tell someone, now look at it this way. The point is that we can attempt to change the way in which one sees the duck rabbit or hears a certain musical theme at will. The role played by the will in changing a perceived aspect is linked to the role played by the context or seeing a figure or hearing a theme according to a certain aspect. One of the ways in which aspect seeing differs from mere perception depends on the crucial role the context plays in aspect seeing. For example, in the lectures on philosophical psychology, Wittgenstein remarks, there is a drawing here of three pointed things or square things in one room. Anybody would call this three things, not 17, say. I can say, look at it as cogs pointing up or as cogs pointing down. There can be no command, see his shirt as blue. My commands give you a context for the drawing. The context and the changing of aspects at will are clearly connected here. A command provides a context for seeing the drawing as cogs pointing up or pointing down. But not any command can make one see an aspect, because not any command provides a suitable context. Nor anything could be subject to alternative ways of seeing, as the shirt example illustrates. In other words, there are significant constraints on aspects one could see. We would not see the above drawing as 17 things. As Wittgenstein notes, you only see the duck rabbit aspects if you are already conversant with the shapes of these two animals. Background knowledge of the way concepts are related is clearly required in order to be able to see certain aspects. In this sense, aspect perception seems to presuppose that such an aspect corresponds to some conception we have. The subtle interplay between acute and chronic phases of aspect seeing strongly supports the view that Wittgenstein's discussion of aspect seeing is not merely about special cases of dual aspect pictures. Rather, it suggests that Wittgenstein's discussion of aspect seeing purports to show that our ordinary notion of seeing and perceiving pictures and signs is connected with learning to see certain aspects and assimilate them. And this is also important, assimilate them into our ordinary ways of learning. They become second nature. At the same time, one must be cautious not to overgeneralize here and claim that any seeing involves aspect seeing. As the example above clearly rules out. It is perhaps for such reasons that Wittgenstein thinks that seeing is far more complex than we usually take it to be. In Wittgenstein's words, we find certain things about seeing puzzling because we do not find the whole business of seeing puzzling enough. Or again, the concept of seeing makes a tangled impression. Well, it is tangled. And I think this is a good place to put a stop. We are presently at page 65. Um, 1725. And we have the 7th of August today. 11:50. Exactly. Well, it's tangled. Let's see. There were a lot of interesting stuff here, and page 60. There's page 60. In the first paragraph on page 60. The second sentence there is shortly, if what one experiences in hearing a word plays no role in a language game, no experience relevant for understanding meaning can be missing. This is a helper, although it's pretty compact here. Let me try to untangle it. Well, it's pressing to the understanding. If it doesn't participate in the language, nothing can add or help out for you to understand the meaning. And the same is, in the opposite case, true with a meaning blind person. There was an example with an arrow. I'm going to come to that soon. But if he cannot see it as pointing upwards, nothing can change that conception. That is very important. Meaning is participating in the language game. Nothing is missing from a word. If it doesn't participate in the language game. And then there's a go through of a sort of less strong side in this discussion, because it's also discussion that Ohad, Nachtomy and Andreas has. How important is aspect seeing? And Schulte takes a rather more conservative point of view. In his idea, aspect blindness is something like not having a musical ear. Going to The next page. And in the quote here from the remarks of the philosophy of psychology, we have a brilliant one. Last sentence I'm going to mention. Such that one can say that the names Beethoven and Mozart do not only sound differently, but they are accompanied by a different character. And this different character cannot be seen or heard or felt by the aspect mind. The character is something other than that they are sounding and looking different. There's a certain character to Beethoven, as well as there is one to Mozart. Of course, these characters are beyond explanation, so I shouldn't explain them. It's absolutely wrong, but I will still do that. I think it can be helpful if you promise me to forget it as soon as I've done it. Mozart, more joyful, more frivolous, more easygoing. Certain colors associate to him too. And there is a certain je ne sais quoi. Beethoven, stern, irresolute, strong, not frivolous at least. And now you forget what I said. This is how we see how things participate, and there in the participation they get their meaning. And as the text progresses, we sort of come to the understanding that what a meaning blind person would lack is not something marginal. It is something quite central. And to understand words as they are. We go to the 7th or 8th line on the same page from the bottom. For example, consider Wittgenstein's remarks about the English words this, that, these, those, will, and shall. It would be incredibly difficult to give rules for the use of these words. You need to do them. And any rule constructed, especially between the difference between will and shall, will lead to so many exceptions that it wouldn't be helpful. But use is what the rule is, and there wouldn't be a single Englishman who made a mistake, other in some few exceptions. But as we as foreigners might continue our whole lives. This applies to everything. That is sort of compare will and shall with Beethoven and Mozart. They have different character. And once you know those characters, you will use them correctly also. Their use is felt, as it were, as a physiognomy. And I think that's meant quite literally. You feel it as you feel that something is cup of cocoa, or recognize that the animal in front of you is a red-headed cat, so on. Or as we mentioned before in the text of Edmund Dane and Johnston, somebody has a soul. It's directly like physiognomy, identified or seen. Doesn't take any extra thinking or calculation. And ja, ursäkta. It's directly felt. It's as physiological as anything. And this, of course, goes for orthography as well. Also a very good example. Something is spelled in a different way, it gives a completely different feeling. And you wouldn't like to have it that way. Then we go further. Page 62. A couple lines down. The case of the experienced meaning is aching with seeing a figure as this or that. We must describe this conceptual kinship. We don't say that in both cases we have to do with the same. And that introduces that, oddly enough, sameness is dependent on aspect C. And this will be clearer with the arrow. As in this example of the arrow, anyone, and this is a bit further down, anyone who cannot understand and learn to use the words to see the sign as an arrow, that's whom I call meaning blind. It will make no sense to tell him, you must try to see it as an arrow, and one won't be able to help him in that way. So the meaning blind cannot learn to use words to see the sign as an arrow. And in the case of the arrow, if he cannot see, it could also point to the left, to the right. It would be hard to see that it's pointing upwards. I think maybe you can have had that experience if you look at something too hard, too eager to understand what it is that you're seeing. And then you would lose what you see. Page 63, 20 lines down. We are not normally seeing a picture of a person as a picture person, but as a person. So you see, seeing something as a person is not seeing someone as a picture, seeing just one side of that person. You see a person. And say nobody been able to explain that before. Some people say we put all the different pictures of a person together to make a person. I would say that makes no sense at all. We see directly the aspect of a person as well as we directly see the duck or the rabbit. Page 64. There is a voluntary act, at least to some of the aspects seen, which is mighty interesting. This is about 23, 24 lines down in the second paragraph. Third line in the second paragraph. Very good. Wittgenstein writes, seeing an aspect is a voluntary act. We can tell someone, now look at it like this. Try again to see the similarity. Listen to the theme this way. And we can listen or hear differently on command, and that command is our own. This is what Wittgenstein means with at will. We cannot change everything because how the aspect participates in the language game. We cannot tell somebody see the shirt as blue, but we can do a lot of things. So our will make the world. How the will is constructed, how strong it is, how skillful. I would say there are many factors there. Page 65. And this is an important explanation. Fourth line on the second paragraph. And he's been talking about chronic and acute phases of aspect seeing, how something gets established It's a sort of takes time. It suggests that Wittgenstein's discussion of aspect seeing purports to show that our ordinary notion of seeing and perceiving pictures and signs is connected with learning to see certain aspects and assimilate them into our ordinary ways of seeing. And I think that assimilate is very important. We get used to it. We still do it, but it becomes so customary to us. So we no longer reflect upon it. And I'd say that is one of the best or simplest explanation for the collapse of the possibility wave. We get used to collapsing things, so to speak, and we are no longer aware of them and take them to be objects separated from our will and our observational powers because of habit. Wittgenstein means that the tanglement is involving us. Half, at least, of what Wittgenstein is mentioning is us as observers. We're participating, and he makes an excellent job here to show how that works. Habit, time. And we get used to it. And in the end today, the idea that we are participatory seems just too incredible to be true almost. It's not. It's just the opposite. It's a very predisposition that there can be any experience whatsoever. We do seeing. And then it gets established, it's in the language game. Being in the language game could in some ways be compared to it being established as a habit. Kalle, comments?
Yes, page 59. Page 59 is about the table. No, not the table, but the bank.
Bank, yes.
Consider a proposition containing the ambiguous word bank, an example to which Wittgenstein returns again and again. We could compare Hans with the Greek word trapeza.
Yes,
That means bank, where you get out cash. It's a very old word. It is attested already about 1400 BC.
Wow.
And it means having 3 feet. But the Greeks in classical time thought it meant having 4 feet. Because a table looks to have 4 feet. The classical table had 4 feet, but the early tables probably had only 3 feet. They were more stable. Anyhow, why is this important? Think about Plato in the Republic. He discusses the ideal table and the ideal bed, and how would the ideal table look like?
Yeah.
Does it have 3 feet or 4 feet? That's why Plato, I think so, doesn't like language, because it messes up. Plato finds language as his enemy.
Yeah.
He says that the sophists, they like language, but language is bad for Plato. He prefers images. He doesn't like to have to. Okay, I think you get my point. I will not digress. But so it eventually acquired the meaning of bank, where you deposit cash in modern Greek. So it's interesting that Wittgenstein discussed bank as well, the English word bank.
Very good.
But would you like to add something about trapeza? I think you are familiar with the word.
Yes, and it goes to show that trapeza has at least three different, you can call them sides to it, like three sides of the same coin. And a meaning blind person would say that the words are completely different and there are three different objects. But it's all down to the use, and I can imagine up sentences where it doesn't make a difference what it is. And I think that goes to prove a bit that the Platonic idea doesn't work.
Let me continue, leaving the table behind. Next page, page 60. Let me. Yes, it was about the sign, arrow. Let's go to the page. Arrow. Where do we have it? Yes. So let's actually take a look on a real sign, traffic sign. I'm not certain that I understand what Wittgenstein means. Is he here like an analytical philosopher? This sounds a little bit like an analytical philosophy that things point at some things. But I don't think that he means in that sense.
No, what he means is that if you take one of these signs, let's see here, maybe the first one there.
You mean this?
Yes, and you can point at it at the sharp stick end.
Okay.
So point to it at the sharp stick end. Let's see, make it a bit smaller. I think the
Okay.
no, it doesn't.
Let me see if I am able to pull it out. Now it's wait.
I think that would almost do it. Or go back to the Google result there, and there is small enough.
Okay, I think
Yeah, just point to it there. Point to the sharp end, and then point to the other end, the blunt end. There are people who cannot see that, and this is going to be complicated, who cannot see that the pointy end is the direction. The whole cultures that are like that. And you can point to the side, the upper side, the pointy end of the upper side, one of those. People can also understand that that is a direction. And there are also, I think, even more different cultures where there is no understanding of any direction at all. So by using the traffic sign and Of course, it sounds odd to say use in this connection, naturally. But by using it, we come to understand the rule of this sign in our language only by using it. It would not help to explain to a Yanoni Indian in the Amazon that it's pointing to the left, this one. No amount of explanation would help. Only training can do that. And if the person is too old, it's not even certain that that will happen. So we sort of collapse the superposition at some point, and the language got used to it, and we got used to it. But it's still aspect seeing.
How would Saussure say? He would perhaps say that the word sign, that is like the word here that we see here written out with four letters, that it's arbitrary. He would Saussure perhaps also say that this very sign is arbitrary because different cultures would interpret differently.
Yes. Of course, and he uses the arrow, Wittgenstein uses the arrow to explain something maybe more also when it comes to verbal language, if you like, or written language. It is even more frequent in language as verbal than it is in signs. But signs, since they are simple, and that's also the reason for the duck rabbit, they are excellent tools in explaining this.
But what could we say to Saussure if we would be like, I don't know, Wittgenstein? We could say that, okay, you need to learn these things that these are arbitrary. Okay, we agree that these are arbitrary. You have to learn these things. The sign is a sign. But Saussure was that everything points to something else. So the word sign, the four letters, it points to.
Kalle, you have to bring the tone down a bit. You disagree.
Okay. So for Saussure, everything is pointing to something else, isn't it? So for Saussure, he says that these four letters are arbitrary, and these four letters arbitrarily point at this letter, this sign, which in turn is arbitrary. And this in turn, when you learn the sign, that this means actually that you have to turn left here, is also something arbitrary. So everything in Saussure points to something else. So everything in Saussure points at something else.
Yeah, and what Saussure is not aware of, the actual pointing process is a sign, if you like, only in certain languages, not all languages.
Mm-hmm. No, I think perhaps he would agree with that because he says that the things are like words, like sign, they are arbitrary because in another language like Swedish, we say tecken, and he would agree with that these names are arbitrary. So he would probably agree with that. But he would not.
What I meant was the actual pointing process.
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
That will not be understandable if you don't know what pointing is. Apart from sign pointing, I mean it in more regular way, pointing towards.
Mm-hmm.
That would undermine his reasoning. All words in the Wittgensteinian take, and I think Ohad and Andreas Blank would agree. Also such words as representation and that a sign is pointing to something signified. Also, those things comes from use.
And it's also the signified thing is always the prioritized thing.
Yeah.
So that's problematic. But so the road would be the important thing. It's also that you have to turn to left. Okay, we could agree in this case that you have to turn to left. That is the important thing.
Well, I have myself the experience of pointing to things in a foreign country, and people were looking at my finger. And I really understood that no amount of explanation would help.
So you say that the thing itself is as important once you learned the thing. I don't know, perhaps some complicated things. Let me see. So what Wittgenstein said, to see the thing as an arrow. Yes, you have to see it as an arrow. You have to learn this is a process. People in I'm like in Amazon forest would perhaps not know this is actually an arrow. You have to go to left. Here's the point, of course, that you have to learn this.
Precisely, and takes time, and it's also inside of the language game. That makes it even harder to be aware of it. It's a habit of a culture, but it's also a habit on a personal level. But
Absolutely.
it still is a collapse of the superposition by habit. And we mistake that habit for being the real world or something like that, or an unmovable platonic static world or something like that.
Absolutely. So yes, indeed, that's what I think in everything socio is stasis. There is no movement.
No,
It's
exactly. No movement at all. Dead as a dodo.
There's also you think about the S as it's those stasis, no movement at all. Let me see here. Where he comment on picture person. Let me see. On this page, picture. Yes, this you mentioned this phrase on page 63. You're not normally seeing a picture of a person as a picture slash person, but as a person. Here, actually, I would not agree with Wittgenstein. Because as he later says on page 65, everything is anchored. If you see a drawing of a person, you will see it's also an artwork or a picture. You're not normally seeing a picture of a person as a picture of a person, but I think you actually see it as also as a picture. If you get my point, because the point is that everything is anchored, so it is also a picture.
It doesn't mean a picture in like a picture, like a drawing or a painting. It means a picture. As you look at somebody, you only get one side. Think of it as a photo, maybe. So,
Okay, perhaps I can, but I don't really
in order to see a person, you need to take 1,000 photos of someone. So what he tried to explain is you see somebody as a person directly. There's no putting together.
Okay, why not? Why not? Why not? But the last we could end with this thing on 65. I think this was the most important thing today. It's actually the last phrase that we read today. The concept of seeing makes a tiny impression where it is staggered. If you compare with the example with arrow, everything is staggered, so you cannot separate the sign, you cannot separate the signifier and the signifier, because everything is staggered.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Very good. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Very good.
So this is the great takeaway, I think, these last two phrases.
It's tangled. It's tangled. Any
Yes.
separation does violence to what's actually happened or how it's working, and it doesn't really make sense. But to get to that point, of course, there's a lot of work, but you can come to that understanding. But I think I'll end there. If you,
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I will thank all the listeners. Thank you very much for joining in, and have a very nice morning, day, afternoon, or whatever you are experiencing. Bye bye for now.
Bye.